It's so wonderful to have you all here this evening. It's a real privilege, and I'm just loving seeing where everyone's coming in from. This is really exciting. We're going to introduce ourselves first off, and I'll get the screen share going first. So my name is Tom Nicholas, and I have. Well, I'll start by saying I'm a Richmond alum. So I graduated from the University of Richmond myself many years ago. And I have been here in the admission office for 14 years now. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you both as a representative of the admission office and as a Spider alum.
Yeah, my name is Brian Wyora, and I'm an admission counselor at the University of Richmond. I did not attend Richmond, but my sister did. So I attended it vicariously through her, I suppose. And my territories in terms of where I manage are the great state of Texas, New York City, and Long Island. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just as sort of an overview, this is a 45-minute or so. We'll try not to go too much longer than that presentation. Where we're going to sort of go through crafting the college essay, sort of some helpful writing prompts, and then also some suggestions and some general tips and advice. So Tom, if you want to start us off.
Absolutely, Brian. And I'll add too that, I hope that what we share tonight, while certainly we are representing the University of Richmond, I hope that what we share tonight is useful information for you as you write essays for a variety of different colleges. This session is designed to be we've got some Richmond specific content in here, but a lot of it is hopefully advice that will help you throughout your college essay writing process. So when I think back on my own college application experience, one of the most distinct memories in my mind is from this one night. It was probably October or November of my senior year. And I sat down to write my first college essay. And I have it's like this image that's seared in my brain. I'm sitting in front of my computer. I've got some essay prompts in front of me, and I've got an open Microsoft Word document, and it's blank, and the cursor is just sitting there blinking. And I sat there, I had this distinct memory of sitting there for like probably 5 or 6 minutes, having absolutely no idea what to do or where to start. And I share that first of all to say that we've been through this process too, and we know what it can be like. I wish I'd had a workshop like this one to help sort of give me a little bit more guidance at that point in my own life. But I share that also because I think part of what was freezing me in that moment was this sense of anxiety. And the college process can already be a pretty intense, pretty anxiety-ridden process for some students. I think there's an extra level of maybe uncertainty or anxiety when it comes to writing essays. And I think that part of the reason for this is to put a more positive spin on it, because the essay is such a great opportunity for you in your college application. It's a chance that you have to share about yourself with us. It's a chance for you to certainly demonstrate your writing ability and those skills that you've gained over the years. But it's also this opportunity to share some of the things that you're seeing here on this slide, right? Your ambitions, an experience you've had, your personality, your interests, your passions. When we put all of these things on a slide together, it looks really overwhelming. The reality is your college essay isn't going to be able to do all of those things. Those are some examples of different things that your essay might do. But I think that's part of what's so intimidating about the essay, is that it feels like you have to do all of these things, right? Do you have any thoughts on that, Brian?
I think that was really well stated. And just sort of to move on to maybe the next slide, in terms of what people tend to focus on when they think about their college essay is the topic. But as I say right here, it's not the topic that matters. It's how you write, and it's also what you reveal about yourself. So, I think sometimes students think that they have to write about what we want to hear or what they should write about, but that's not the case. I think what you really, at the end of the day, should write about is the thing that you can express about yourself the best. And I know that sounds a little bit vague, but to give you a really good example of this, I read an essay last year that has stuck with me about this student who every day would come home and work on his tomato patch. He grew tomatoes in his backyard, and he'd come home every day to sort of nurture and foster these tomatoes. And, you know, it certainly stuck with me because I've read last year over 750 essays, but I only read one about a tomato patch. And so it's not necessarily about being doing something super big or something that you feel like necessarily is the most important thing on your resume. It is rather about doing something that is individual, you know, as opposed to being original, if that distinction makes sense. Also, I have in my notes here just something to point out too. Sometimes people wonder what kind of tone they should use in writing the college essay. And the way I've sort of described it is you want to be business casual, right? It's not a formal academic essay, but it's also not like a blog post. You know, it's somewhere in between there. And that's why I'm trying to say it's much more about how you write and how you reveal yourself than necessarily what you say. Anything to add on that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my experience, if I were to guess, you know, if we were to ask the question, you know, what is the most common or the sort of the biggest mistake that students make when selecting a college essay topic? I think that the average student applying to college, the average person, at least in the United States, on the street, would probably say that the biggest mistake you can make is picking a topic that's too bland or ordinary or common. And the reality is that I read excellent essays on very common topics every year. I think that the biggest mistake students make, you already alluded to this, Brian, is when selecting a topic is feeling compelled to select a certain topic because they think it will stand out to us or because they think it will be unique. And often what that means is that students aren't writing about something that maybe really deeply, truly matters to them, right? It's a mistake that I see too, you know, if you think about your activities resume on the application. Oftentimes I feel like students feel like they need to put the things that sound the most impressive first on their activities resume. The reality is we would much prefer that you put the things that matter to you the most first. And that I think is true of the essay as well. We're going to talk a lot about authenticity, and authenticity begins with selecting an authentic topic, a topic that is meaningful to you, a topic that you will actually be engaged writing about. So that's what I would throw.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when it comes to the common application essay prompts, one thing you'll notice, if you haven't taken a look at these yet, now is the time. For most of you, your senior year is either just beginning or hasn't quite begun. And I would say if you have not yet started down this path of brainstorming and starting to draft essays, the sooner the better. Now is the time to begin. Don't put this off to the last minute, and we'll share more as we go along about why that is. It takes time and it takes space. But these are the common app essay prompts, and we've taken the liberty of highlighting a couple of things in red here because you'll find that these essay topics are all personal. They're all asking you to write a personal essay. To Brian's earlier point, we're not looking for an academic paper. We're looking for a personal essay. The other thing I'd like to point out is that even if you crossed number 7 off the list, which is basically write about whatever you want to write about, it's not exactly the question, but that's more or less what it's getting at. Even among the first 6 prompts, you could still write about pretty much anything you wanted to and find a way of working it in to answer one of these essay questions. And again, the point there being that what we are looking for is to learn more about you. Right, Brian, what is it you say about the distinct part that the essay plays in the application?
Yeah, probably my favorite thing to say about the essay too. So the essay is the only part of the application where you get to talk to us directly. Everything else on your application is someone else talking on your behalf. So your recommendation letters are obviously your teachers talking on your behalf. The transcript and the test scores are sort of the numbers talking on your behalf. Even the resume is like a former version of yourself talking on your behalf. This is the only time where we get to learn about you, not just as a student, but also as a person. And so you really want to take advantage of that, because I think, Tom, and you've been doing this longer. I was going to say a lot longer, but I didn't want to sound rude, but longer than I have. And I have to say that I think one of the times, sometimes when we're looking at an application, especially at a school like Richmond, where we're using a holistic review, is we're asking, is this someone who I would want to go to class with? Is this someone who I'd want to grab lunch with and talk, or is this someone I'd want to study with? And so the essay is kind of the best way to get to know you in that way, in that sort of light, because ultimately that's sort of our goal, is to bring people on campus, not to bring numbers on campus. And I think that is where that's where you can really shine in your essay.
And I think that that's also why, to go back to me sitting in front of that blank cursor, the blank screen with the blinking cursor, I think that's also why the essay can be so intimidating, because it is this blank page, right? It is this opportunity. So I would encourage you to let the questions help you focus, right? You don't have to communicate your entire life story to us in your essay. You don't have to communicate everything on your resume to us in your essay. We'll talk as we go along about focus and staying, keeping it tight, and picking one topic to write your essay about. But allow these questions to guide you, and ultimately, make sure that what you are providing for us is reflective, right? It's a personal essay. It says something about you, about who you are, and about what your personality is. So how do we get there, or where do you start? Because going back to my example, starting with the prompts sitting in front of a Word document was not the right spot to start.
Yeah, so I want to talk about brainstorming. These are some ways to get you started. And the thing I always say about prompts is that it gets you started, but it's not the full task. So once you sort of start to get going, forget the prompt and then just go with the essay. But just a couple of suggestions. Actually, the first one is from Tom. So Tom, I'll let you explain the first one here.
Sure. So I think, to Brian's point, step away from the essay prompts when you start, and we're gonna say that part of this process is being self-reflective. That starts in your brainstorming. So one exercise, and these are just a couple of examples, take them or leave them, but one exercise that I like to suggest students do is take out a piece of paper, set a timer for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and pull out a pen or pencil and just finish the sentence "I am" in as many different ways as you can on that piece of paper. I am a brother. I am a senior in high school. I am not a morning person. I am, an avid amateur astronomer. I am, in love with Legos. All sorts of things that, come up with, just get the juices flowing, right? Come up with as many different ways of finishing that sentence as you can. What about you, Brian? What do you suggest?
Yeah, and if I am's a little tricky, I have a modification on that, which is go to a random verb generator online and replace am with other verbs. Like I do ballet, I make coffee in the morning, I think about, whatever. If am is tough for you, which I think even, for someone who's establishing his career, it's tough for me too. But if you make those verbs a little bit more active and a little bit more playful, you may arrive at something that you wouldn't think of before. And that's sort of how you can start. And to go to the next prompt too, this sort of coincides with a piece of advice I always give about essay topics is, it's better to write about something small than it is to write something big. And it's better to write about something specific than about something vague. So the best way to get that started is look at something in your room. I know you all have spent a lot of time over the past year and a half in your room. And so think about like an object in your room, a pencil, maybe a piece of artwork on your wall, something in your room, and try writing about how that thing in your room represents who you are. One of the best essays I ever read in my life was from this student who she was left-handed, and she always had a blue mark on her left hand. And she wrote her entire college essay about that. And I just thought it was brilliant because it was so specific, but it said, and small, but it was said a lot about who she was as a person. And I think that that is sort of a good starting point for what an essay could be.
Many of you have probably done free writing exercises in school. That's another great way to start and get your sort of get your creative buzz going. Would be to spend a little bit of time free writing. Like maybe do some of these listing exercises that we just described, and then take one of those things and just start writing about it. Right, pen to paper, and just write. And you've heard me say twice now, pen to paper. I do strongly encourage you during this brainstorming phase, at least, to try to get away from a computer. There's lots of interesting research out there that shows, this is some really interesting sort of neuroscience research that shows that the physical act of writing on paper, putting pen to paper, gets the human brain's creative neurons firing in ways that typing on a computer screen does not. And the best writers will tell you this too, that doing things on paper helps. If you're really feeling stuck, ask friends and family. When you think of me, what do you think about? What do you think is interesting about me? What do you think is unique about me? See what they have to say. But do all of this before you get to the essay prompts themselves. Because in doing this, you're going to come up with some ideas. You're going to start. It's going to get you thinking about who you are and what's important to you, or what's meaningful to you, or what's a sort of an ordinary part of your life that could be good fodder for a college essay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. We can sort of transition, I think, here. So on authenticity, you want to take this, Tom?
Sure. So I think we talk a lot about authenticity. I'm going to share with you really quickly my least favorite piece of college essay writing. I hear so many people say, when it comes to writing your college essays, just be yourself. And I dislike that advice because, first of all, I think it implies that you know who you are. And that's not something that I knew when I was 17 or 18 years old. Frankly, that's something that I'm still figuring out. In my fourth decade on this planet. And so who you are is something that you don't just know that. It's something that you maybe need to think about a little bit and spend some time reflecting on. But it also implies that advice of be yourself. It also implies that you can just do that in writing. And that was my expectation when I sat down with that blank Word document, is that I could just start writing and be myself. And that's not how writing works. Writing is something that you learn how to do. And writing a college essay is a distinctive type of writing that is going to take a little bit of practice. So again, give yourself time and give yourself space. And rather than just being yourself, take time to develop an authentic voice. And that means a couple of different things. That means writing about yourself. Right? It's okay to focus the topic of your essay on an experience that you had, or maybe even in some cases on another person and the impact they've had on you, but make sure that it's fundamentally about you. Use examples and anecdotes. Don't just tell us things. Don't just write a narrative of what happened. Use illustrations and anecdotes to show rather than tell. Play to your strengths too. This comes with topic selection. Like we said already, don't select a topic that isn't something that you think you can sink your teeth into. Don't select a topic that isn't something that you can write about in a sort of meaningful, passionate way. But it also means when it comes to your writing, make sure that you're not doing anything that feels uncomfortable to you. Do you want to hit on some of those don'ts, Brian?
Yeah, and actually, Tom, that was really quite fitting because one of the questions in our Q&A was about showing versus telling. So I'm glad you were able to kind of address that as well. Yeah, so some don'ts, and I saw there was a question in the chat too about do's and don'ts. Yeah, so here's some things to not do. So the first is being different for the sake of being different. And we have two examples here. So sometimes we'll get people who want to write a poem, or they'll start an essay really dramatically, like it was a dark and stormy night. Yeah, don't make it a short story. Don't make it a poem, especially if you're not a poet. Sometimes people try to go for humor. it's one of those things that is either going to work or it's going to flop, and there's really no middle ground. So if you think it's funny, if you're trying to be funny, make sure it is, review it by like a bunch of people and be like, hey, is this funny? Because if it lands flat, it's going to land very flat. And then the other thing too is, like I said, the tone should be business casual. So we can tell when they're sort of, we call them thesaurus essays. Don't write with words that you have to look up the definition of. Everything should be already in your immediate vocabulary. And that doesn't mean necessarily be conversational or be simple in terms of what you're writing, but being genuine, right? Being authentic, words that you would use in normal sort of normal writing when you're putting pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard or whatever. I think that those are some of the things to avoid, and we'll get to some more tips later. I see some questions in the chat and in the Q&A about more do's and don'ts. But when it comes to authenticity, these are the sort of tips that we want to highlight here.
Yeah, I would say that it's okay to use big words if you're a person that does that in your everyday conversation. Right. For example, on that thesaurus front, I pulled up an essay from a couple of years ago that was a great example of maybe what not to do. And I was looking at it beforehand, and there's in the first two sentences of this essay, I found the words vicarious, premonition, vituperously, egregious, and aplomb. First two sentences. This was an essay about quitting the lacrosse team. And so, pretty clear to me that the student was going for something that maybe wasn't authentic, that they were trying to sound more intellectual than they really probably needed to in that particular context. I've read many attempts at poem essays over the years. Honestly, I don't think I've ever read a good one. I've maybe read one or two that were okay. But the reason was that the students writing those essays weren't poets. It wasn't authentic. They were choosing to write a poem because they thought it would stand out, not because it was something that was actually natural to them or authentic to them.
Absolutely. And so just sort of moving on, and I've seen some great questions about this too. There are school-specific supplements. So I want to talk first about sort of Richmond's school-specific supplement, and then some general overview supplemental stuff. And so looking at what Richmond's supplement is, Tom, can you, next slide?
Oh, yep, apologies.
All good.
There you go.
So the Richmond question is our supplemental essay. We only require one supplement, and you have these three prompts here. First, very piece of advice, don't try to answer all three prompts. Please choose one. Please just choose one. And this is advice that obviously applies to any one of these prompts, but as well as any prompt from any other institution, is number one is actually answer the question. Don't use it as an excuse to sort of be like, let me explain my resume, or let me explain this grade in a class, or, whatever it is. Like this, there's a reason why, we had a committee over the summer where we actually retailored these questions for the next year. And so we're really excited to read the answers to these prompts. And so we want to hear what they have to say. But at the same time, you want to balance that with the fact that, oh, Tom, you went back.
Oh, my apologies.
All good.
Sorry.
We want to balance it with the fact that, you want to write about yourself too. And this applies more to essays about, like, you'll hear questions like, why insert college here? Like, so for instance, if there was a question here that was like, why University of Richmond? This is a very common supplemental essay. We are not asking that question here, but some colleges do. You want to make sure in those types of essays, you're still talking about yourself. Because as admissions representatives and counselors, like, we know the things about our university. Like, we know all the facts and figures about, like, the library, or, the English department, or the sports team, or whatever. But what we don't know about is you. And so you want to think about this in tangent with the first essay, the personal essay too, where it's still a chance for us to get to know you as a student and as a person. It's also a chance for us to know things about you that maybe aren't on your resume. But at the same time, it's kind of a more focused, more narrow way for us to get to know about you in context of, say, the first prompt, which is tell us about most unusual talent you have. So we get to know a little bit about who you are there as well. Anything to add to that, Tom?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that, yeah, supplemental essays are, I see them as another opportunity, right? So another opportunity to write a focused essay on answering a particular question, but an opportunity to, think about using this strategically to, as you perhaps struggle with your primary, common, or coalition application essay, and you're not sure, you want to communicate all these different things about yourself, and you really need to limit that down to like one dimension or one topic. Use this as an opportunity to bring in something different about yourself and to complement it, as you said, Brian.
Absolutely.
Starting this past year and moving into this next year, we also have the community disruption question on the common application. And this is an area where I think in some ways it's just as easy to tell you this is not something that you have to answer. And frankly, in many cases, it's probably not something you need to answer. Having read a whole bunch of answers to this community disruption question this past year, I can tell you pretty clearly what is worthwhile writing about in this question and what's not. So first off, as you see here in that right-hand column, you don't need to worry about telling us about changes that your school made to their academic policies, to their grading systems, to how instruction worked, when you were remote, when you weren't. Your school's profile, your school report form, your counselor is going to be able to tell us all of that in your application. So you don't need to use this space to explain the changes that happened in your school environment. I would also say when it comes to this COVID-19 optional question that the question you should really ask yourself is, were there ways that COVID-19 impacted me that it really didn't impact most people? Because you have to remember, we all lived through COVID-19. We're still living through COVID-19, right? This is something that is a common experience for students. And so, for example, sharing with us that you weren't able to participate in certain extracurricular activities because of the pandemic, while that may be true and accurate, it's not necessarily particularly useful to us because we kind of assume that that's the case. We assume that all students were not able to participate in extracurriculars for some amount of time because of the pandemic. So think about things like illness, a particularly acute hardship that you experienced as a result of the pandemic, or a significant personal impact that it had on you. I'll give you an example of one that was helpful for me last year. There was a student whose family was already going through some pretty significant financial difficulties. The pandemic exacerbated that. They weren't able to maintain internet at their home. And so in order to attend class and go to school, this student had to go to the public library every day in the middle of a pandemic and use a public computer there. That's pretty significant, right? That's not something that the average student sort of dealt with in light of the pandemic, but that's the kind of detail that's useful in this question. I don't know about you, Brian. I think it's safe to say that most applicants probably don't need to answer this question. Is that fair?
And for most of you, here's what I'll say: like COVID-19 will probably be one of the most significant things that ever happens in your life. I think for most people alive right now of any age, I don't even know what to compare it to. But it's a shared experience in that way. Like you all went through it. Now, so Tom's point about, really it's about if something that no one else around you was really experiencing as well. And again, for all of this advice, for all of what we're saying, ask someone else too. If you feel like, this experience is different, run it by people, run it by your teacher, run it by your classmates, run it by a guidance counselor or someone you trust in your life. Because they'll be able to tell you sort of more objectively, if that experience really is different. And it might be like Tom's example was fantastic, or it was like, actually we all went through it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So before we head over to Q&A, maybe talk through a couple of final sort of pieces of advice and tips, and then we'll get to your questions more directly.
Absolutely, yeah. So you want to just alternate? Tom, go one
sure.
and one. Okay,
we can pop through it.
Okay, so I'll start. I don't know if you want to go up and down or we'll figure it out. But so the first one, stay focused. So here's what that means. Write about one thing. Sometimes I'll read an essay that's like, I was in this class and then I got stuck in a rainstorm after the class. And then after the rainstorm, I went home and had this amazing dinner my grandmother cooked me. And then I had this crazy dream that night. It's like, okay, stop, right? Choose one thing to write about and stay focused on that.
Yep. Stay positive, which is to say, I think, Brian, you may have already made this point, but don't use your essay as a space to try to explain a bad grade that you got, or to talk about. Doesn't mean that you have to write about something upbeat and happy, but it means that you don't want to, your essay isn't the place to try to make up for something like you feel you're lacking in your application. Your essay, again, is a space to play to your strengths and to really lean into who you are and the positive about that, if that makes sense.
And the only quick addition to that too is a really common one that I get that I don't like is like, here's why I got this bad grade freshman year. We already know that. We've seen that grade when we read the transcript. The last thing you want us doing is thinking more about that bad grade. Even if there's some great reason why you got a bad grade in the class, you don't want us thinking about that. So staying positive, staying upbeat, I think that's sort of the goal there. So next one, show, don't tell, right? So, I think that this applies, we've already gone over this a lot. So the one thing I'd want to add about this is like, sometimes people are like, something that really matters to me is the history of racism in America, or social justice, or like these huge topics that like not even an entire book could cover. So, instead of thinking about these really, really large topics that will take years to think about, always smaller, always more specific.
Agreed. Know your audience. Keep in mind who's reading your essay, and keep in mind that that it's going to be, an admission officer, an admission counselor reading your essay, but you never know who exactly is going to be reading your essay. And so sometimes students will ask about sort of, maybe slightly more edgy topics and things like that. And, I always say, I think that I hesitate to say that there are any wrong topics for a college essay, but be thoughtful, and know that if you're going in a more edgy direction, I'm thinking of, essays that use profanity in them extensively, which I have read over the years. As one example, these are the kinds of things that might hit really well with the right person reading your essay, but another person reading your essay might be, very, very, not impressed with that. And so know your audience, and that means to know the types of schools and the personality of the schools that you're applying to. Right. So, if a college is asking sort of quirky off the wall questions for their supplemental essay, they're probably looking for quirky off the wall creative answers, and trying to get a sense of how you react to that. One piece of advice I've heard is, don't write about anything or in a way that you wouldn't want your grandmother to read, or be comfortable with your grandmother reading. And I think for most students, that's probably a good guideline.
Yeah. And Tom, you did another great job of answering a question in the chat, which was exactly about tone. So I think we got that one covered. I'll take the next two just because I've already talked about smaller and better quite a bit. So I don't feel like I need to address that. But this one here, proofread, and proofread again. Obviously, we did not do a very good job of proofreading that square, that tile there. But that was intentional, yes. So so here's the suggestion about proofread. So first of all, you need to actually print out your essay and read it out loud. Because if you're looking at it on a screen, I promise you're gonna miss stuff, right? I just promise you will. Then, once you've done that, then you wanna show it to, if a teacher will look over it, an English teacher, that would be great. But maybe someone that you trust, someone who you think is a better writer than yourself. So that could be a classmate, or a family friend, or maybe your parents or a sibling. But you just want to make sure, because, sometimes people will ask like, well, grammatical mistake, do I automatically deny that applicant? Like, no, of course not. Grammatical mistakes are not the end of the world. but they just obviously don't help you. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, how much do you care about this application? That's not a question you want me ever asking. How much do you care about the University of Richmond? That's not a question you ever want me asking. So grammatical mistakes won't kill you. It's not the end of the world, but they're not going to help you. And it's just better if you don't have them.
And I'd extend that too to being cautious about things like if you're going to name a university in a supplemental essay, for example, and you take that similar question and retool it a little bit for a different university, make sure you swap out the name of the university, because I don't necessarily want to be reading an essay about how a different college is your dream school.
Yeah, that just is not a good feeling.
So don't throw out rough drafts. By this I mean, we talked earlier about the brainstorming process and maybe some free writing, and maybe that means you're starting down a path with a particular topic and then it's just not working. That's okay. Set it aside, start over, giving yourself time and space, which is the next point. But don't throw that out, because the reality is, even if that doesn't work out for, say, your Common App essay, a month or two later, you might come to a supplemental essay question from a university that wasn't on your list before and realize, hey, wait, I started writing that one essay a couple months back that works perfectly for this prompt, and I think I can make it work here. So that effort isn't wasted. Make sure that you're hanging on to those kinds of things.
Yeah. And we've sort of, Tom mentioned, give yourself a lot of time and space. The thing I would add to that is, once you finish writing an essay, close your laptop, do something else. Go play a video game, go on TikTok, whatever you all do, and just forget about it. But then, a couple days later, maybe even a week later, then that's when you look at it again, just so that you get as fresh a pair of eyes as you could possibly have on it.
And finally, follow directions. We've hit on that in a few different ways already, but make sure you answer the question. Make sure you answer all parts of the question. Sometimes essay questions include multiple questions, and you want to make sure that you're answering those thoroughly. In general, I've seen a few questions about word count. In general, stick to those word counts, right? Going a few words over or being a few words under, it's probably not going to be the end of the world, but you never know, right? You just never know what a college or university is going to say. And can you really, if we've given you 650 words to write something and you're at 670, I'm sure there has to be a way of paring that down just a little bit. So you're always safest when you're sticking within the rules, when you're following the directions.
Yeah. So now we're going to go. Sorry, I was going to say, now we're going to go to some of these. Some of these we have kind of answered a little bit. I want to start with this first question, though, Tom. So are there essay topics you get tired of seeing or would warn students to stay away from? And I think every admission counselor in the country has their own list of the essay topics. So it's, if you ask every admission counselor in the country, you would get every single possible essay probably on here. And again, just remembering that it's not the topic that matters as much as how you write about it. But there are a couple that I would want to stray away from. I'll go first, and then Tom, if you want to say your pet peeve essays, I guess these would be called.
Maybe.
So the first for me is essays about other people, particularly relatives. I read tons of essays about how amazing someone's grandparent is, or how amazing someone's parent is, or a cousin, or a great-grandparent, an ancestor. And all that makes me want to do is admit the grandparent. I'm like, great, I'll admit grandma, but not you, right? If you spend time talking about how great someone else is, I don't get to know who you are. So that would be sort of that just is always one that I'm just every time I see the word, grandparent in an essay, I just kind of cringe a little bit. That's not fair, but just sort of me personally. The other one for me is the classic. Now you can do this one well, and Tom has told me a lot that you can do any essay topic well if you write it.
Can be done well, yes.
Yeah, but the other one for me that I would just generally think about avoiding would be the standard sports injury one, just because we read it so much, and I think to do it well is takes so much that I'd rather just not see it.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is solid there, Brian, and that is that I think I always hesitate to say topics to avoid because I always circle around and I think, but there was that one really good essay that I read on a sports injury, right? And so I think that to your point, it's you kind of need to know the degree of difficulty when it comes to writing your essay. It's okay to pick a more common topic like a service project that you were a part of or an extracurricular activity that was meaningful to you. Or maybe even not for Brian, but for other, a grandparent or a particular relationship that was meaningful with a family member, those sorts of things. But you need to be aware of how common the topics are, and the more common the topic is, the more likely students are to be writing about it. The more thoughtful you want to be about, okay, so what is it that's going to make this a personal essay about me? What am I going to bring to the table here that is distinctive and thoughtful? I would say the only topic that I would say, aside from maybe poems, which you mentioned earlier, I don't know that I've ever read a great poem essay. The only real topic that I would say I've never read a good essay on would be romantic relationships. So I don't think I've ever read a good essay on a romantic relationship, on a boyfriend or a girlfriend or anything like that. And not that that's a very common one necessarily, but it's one that often just kind of goes wrong. It doesn't serve the purpose of a college essay of being a personal essay about you so well.
Right. Good point. Yeah. So we're definitely not going to have time to answer all of these for the record because we are at 7:45. And if you need to go, by all means go. We'll probably stay on this till about 8 o'clock. This is Eastern time. I know everyone's on a different time zone. But we'll keep answering questions. But if you all need to go, we understand and we appreciate you spending time with us. Want to say, Tom, I'll throw this one at you. Throw this question at you. Carolina asks, I see many of sample essays mentioning their accomplishments or major interests. Is this a good idea or should I focus on expressing my inner self? And I think I'll let you take that one.
Sure. So the question of kind of focusing on accomplishments and major interests versus more introspection. I would say that, first of all, those two things aren't necessarily at odds with one another. I think you can do both of those things in the same essay. You can share a little bit about it. And I would say, don't get too broad in terms of your accomplishments or interests. Again, focus, pick one particular accomplishment that was meaningful, pick one particular interest that you want to write about, and write about it in a way that is introspective and that helps us gain more insight into who you are. So I don't think those things are necessarily mutually exclusive. I would also say, think about, I think sometimes when students ask yourself the question, this accomplishment that I want to write about, am I wanting to write about that because it really was a meaningful shaping experience for me, or a thing that I'm deeply proud of and that really ties into who I am and what I'm interested in and all that kind of stuff? Or do I feel like I should write about this because it's the kind of thing that you write a college essay about? And if it's the former, good to go. If it's the latter, maybe think about a different topic.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that was well said. And we're getting so many great questions that I want to just keep moving on. Another one here is bouncing off the idea of playing to your strengths. Is it okay to include some of your failures in order to highlight your development? I'll take this one. That could be interesting, and again, like I think failure is kind of a broad word. Again, you don't want to focus on like a bad grade or a bad test score or something that, makes us, is trying to make us feel like bad for you. But like another great essay topic I wrote about is about a student who lost the mouthpiece to their trumpet and was searching around school for the mouthpiece to their trumpet. So it wasn't exactly like a grand moment in this student's life, but it sticks with me because it's just so interesting the way that this essay, like it was just so interesting. And he ended up putting up like flyers around the school, like, have you seen my missing mouthpiece? And set up a Facebook group, and like community members were looking for this mouthpiece. It was like this very interesting thing that wasn't necessarily a success. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, you couldn't put that on a resume. But it was one of those things that stuck out in a positive way, even though it was about something that was a little bit more of a failure. Do you want to add anything to that, Tom?
No, I think that's spot on. Yeah, I think it's okay to write about a failure, particularly if it's something that you learned from and grew from, and sort of shaped you or formed you, and you can write about that in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So another question here, and y'all are asking so many good questions here. One that was asked, and maybe Tom, this one was asked in the chat, and I'm going to get to it first just because it was something that we talked about very specifically about the tone. We've been asked to sort of elaborate on that business casual writing. And since I brought up that term, maybe do you want to elaborate what that means to you?
Sure. I think, it means that, first of all, there's no one single right tone for a college essay. Some of that's going to come down to what's authentic to you and what's your authentic voice like. If you are a deeply analytical person and your essay comes through with a very sort of an analytical tone, I think that's okay. But I think by and large, in general, most of the time, what I would encourage is, I like that analogy of sort of business casual. So again, I've not read too many essays that read like academic papers that are particularly compelling, because they tend to stray away from the personal and get a little bit too businessy, if that makes sense. Conversely, I think that it's okay to be, again, if it's authentic for you, to be, a little tongue in cheek, again, check your humor with others, see if it works. It's okay to do that a little bit, but for most students, I would say, avoiding being overly casual in the way that you write. Think about the things that you've learned about writing essays in school. You want to have, a clear theme and thread. You don't want your essay to meander around and all over the place. You don't want it to be overly conversational necessarily. You want to show, in most cases, some amount of introspection, some amount of sort of thoughtful reflection, if that makes sense. Does that line up with what you mean by business casual, Brian?
I was just going to explain it the same way I did, so I thought, all right, well, I'll throw this at Tom then. So another one here too. How would you suggest approaching an essay about a niche extracurricular initiative that may require a bit of context to explain? I'll take this one, which is that, I think sometimes you don't want to waste space. And if it takes a lot of time to explain, here's this very traditional form of, I read this one essay that was about this very traditional form of folding origami paper. And it was super interesting. But 3/4 of it was here's this ancient art of folding origami paper. And oh yeah, by the way, I happen to do this too. And it's well, okay, I could just have gone to Wikipedia. You don't want your essays to be Wikipedia entries. And I think the way that you approach this is that you teach us about the extracurricular or about the niche thing through personal experience, through anecdote. So you explain, whatever it is by showing us rather than telling us. And I think that that's kind of the solution to that problem. Do you want to add anything to that, Tom?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that sometimes it partly comes back to knowing your audience and giving us some amount of credit. We don't have to have, we all have college degrees. We don't have to have everything spelled out for us. We can infer from what we're reading. You don't want to leave your reader in the dark, though, right? You want to make sure that things that truly are niche or sort of out of the ordinary are explained. But I agree completely with your point there, Brian, that I don't think that explaining something is necessarily mutually exclusive with speaking about your personal experience there.
Yeah. By the way, Tom, we're getting a lot of really nice compliments in the chat. So thank you all for being so appreciative of this. We enjoy doing this as a lot, and we've left our emails up here, a little dangerous. But please feel free to contact us about something in this session. It may take us a little bit to get to it, but we will get to those emails. Maybe like one or two more questions here that have popped up in the chat.
Let me interject there too. So that you don't necessarily, if we don't get to your question, don't go emailing us right away, because we are going to work with our staff here to try to reach out to all of you who've asked questions with the ones that we're not able to get to. And we're going to try to get you an answer sometime in the next couple of days, maybe early to mid next week. So you ought to be hearing from someone here in the admission office with answers to the questions that we don't get to here.
Right. Maybe just one more question here then, Tom, and I'll do this one here. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to all of them here, but that's exactly as Tom said. So we will have someone answer these questions. If you have a good amount of overlap between your resume and sort of what you're writing about, I'm kind of combining a couple questions here, by the way, but what's sort of the best way to maybe write about something that's already pretty prominently on your resume? Because we talked a lot about writing about things that perhaps aren't on your resume, but how do you write about something that is on your resume? Because I think a lot of students have the feeling that they don't want to be bragging in their essay. They don't want to say, hey, I was the world champion archer, like get on my level. No one wants to seem like that guy, like that person. But at the same time, it is kind of the thing they want to write about. So Tom, do you have any advice about how to write about something that is on the resume?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one, I think, very appropriate use of a college essay is to expand upon one thing maybe, or one theme from your resume. Careful with that. Don't, we said this already kind of, but don't try to sum up your entire resume in your essay, or don't try to come up with like a theme or a thread that connects all your different areas of involvement so that you can establish that theme or thread and then write a different paragraph about each area of involvement on your resume. You don't want your essay to read like a resume. But I think it's appropriate to select one thing if that's something meaningful and important to you. And in that case, I don't know that you have to worry too much about redundancy. The resume, you're limited to like 150 characters, or maybe 250 characters in your description of the activity, and so there is plenty more that you can say to highlight a particular area of involvement on your in your essay. I agree with Brian. You don't want to come across as bragging. I read an essay a few years ago that began with the sentence, "I am a natural born leader." And that is, that's the kind of thing that I would much rather you show me than tell me. Through the other things that you write about, through the anecdotes that you share, or the story that you tell in your essays. Similarly, I think with something big on your resume, you don't want your essay to be, certainly don't want it to be literally, I want to talk more about this thing on my resume, here it is, and here's more detail about that thing. But it's totally appropriate if it's something that is meaningful to you, that you can write a personal essay, a reflective essay about, that again shares a little bit more about who you are and speaks to your personality and what makes you tick. I think that's totally appropriate. Do you have anything to add there, Brian?
Yeah, I second everything you just said. And the only other thing I would add is, again, though, make sure that you're not writing about something just because you think you should be writing about it. And that's tough, because if you are a national champion in something, if you are a world leader in something, that seems like the low-hanging fruit, but sometimes it isn't, the best thing or the thing you feel most passionate about. And again, because we read holistically, we're gonna read the resume. We're gonna know, like, hey, this guy is, a world champion chess player. Oh, and by the way, in his spare time, he plays the bongos, like that's kind of how we start to paint a full picture of who a student is. Where if you write about just the chess, like I'll use this chess example, if you write about the chess, like that's kind of what ends up defining your application, which is great, but it's maybe not the whole picture of who you are. I always say holistic should kind of be spelled HOWLE as well. Like whole, we want the whole picture as well. Sorry, WHOLE. That was confusing. I apologize. Anyways,
Well,
that is probably your cue. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I was just saying, I wish we had that more time because there are lots more great questions in the chat. But like I said, we will try to follow up with those of you whose questions have gone unanswered at this point in time. Brian, do you have any sort of final words of advice as we sort of sort of a parting shot as we leave here?
Actually, I do, because it relates to this last question that was just asked on the chat. So it's going to we're ending up answering your question with this last piece of advice.
Perfect.
So in a increasingly test optional world, in a world where we're seeing more and more impressive applicants numerically, I think the essay is becoming an increasingly more important part of the application. And I always think, even if you're not a great writer, you can use that to your advantage, because it's just going to be something that's going to be able to separate you in a way that maybe 5-10 years ago, a really good test score could have, or a really good GPA could have, because we're seeing that a lot now. So you want to make sure to take it seriously. I mean, obviously by attending this, you want to make sure to be taking it genuinely, because it can be something that ends up being a point of differentiation. It can be something that swings the needle for you.
Thanks, Brian. I'll say one more time, and then I'll share my parting wisdom as well. I'll share one more time. If your question wasn't answered, we are going to endeavor it over the next week-ish to get to some of these questions that have remained unanswered. And so we may be reaching out to you with those. You can reach out to us. Again, our emails are on the screen, but you can also look up your regional admission representative in our office through the admission website. As far as my final piece of advice goes, I think that, again, I want to go back to like the sort of pressure cooker that the college admission process can sometimes feel like. And try to maybe alleviate a little bit of that pressure. I think sometimes the message that students hear is that you need to write an extraordinarily unique essay that your admission counselor, the person reading that essay, is going to remember in order for you to get into your top choice colleges, to good colleges. And we've shared a few examples tonight of things that we liked and things that we didn't like. Maybe a few essays that we remember, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. But I think that as I look back on my career, I estimate at this point I've read somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 college essays. And the reality is that if you asked me to make a listing exercise right now of all of the essays that I remember, the really good ones that really stood out to me that I remember, I could maybe off the top of my head come up with 20 or 30, maybe. But the reality is I have advocated passionately for far more than 20 or 30 students in my career. I've advocated for thousands of students in the admission committee. And that doesn't mean that they had to write essays that I was going to remember 5 years later. If you make that the bar that you're setting for yourself, to write an essay that I'm going to remember years down the road, your head's going to explode from the pressure. And that's not the point of writing a college essay. Don't put that bar so high. Focus inward on all the things that we've talked about, rather than focusing too much on trying to impress. The word essay, for those of you who have taken French, comes from the French verb essayer, which means to try. Right? Your essay does not have to be there's no such thing as a perfect essay. Your essay does not have to be perfect, but you want it to be a really strong try, a really excellent endeavor, a best foot forward kind of attempt to communicate something meaningful about yourself. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We're going to sign off now, but we look forward to seeing you again. Remember, there are lots more Spinning Your Web webinars coming up throughout the fall, and we hope to see you all at some of those soon. And we'll look forward to maybe seeing you in person, some of you down the road as well. All right.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good night.